It's been said that the two most important days of a person's life are the day they're born and the day they figure out why. Hi, I'm Jimmy Lakey, the host of the Critical Mission podcast. I figured out what my why was. I thought early on I might be a politician. Maybe I'd be a pastor. Maybe I'd be a preacher. I started a music company. I host a radio show. But my why, it was all discovered on the streets of Africa, in Rwanda, when I met a little child that I adopted and decided I'm going to take care of widows and orphans in Africa. My organization, my why, is riverspromise.org. What's your why? What about my guest? What's their why? We tell the story of people's why right here on the Critical Mission Podcast. All right, today's guest I've been looking forward to, his name is Evan Todd. About 25 years ago, the time of this recording, was a massacre, a big shooting. It was horrible. I lived just down the street at the time from Columbine High School when it happened. I didn't know Evan Todd at the time, but through the years, through radio, ended up becoming friends and stayed in contact with him all these years. My guest on today's episode of My Mission is Critical, the Critical Mission podcast, is Mr. Evan Todd. He's a Columbine High School survivor. Evan, hello, sir.
Hey, good morning. Hello, how are you?
Doing very well. Been 25 plus years. Were you a junior or a senior when Columbine happened?
I was a sophomore.
You were a sophomore, 15 when it happened.
Yeah.
And I know I went to your high school graduation, so I met you when you were 15. Gosh, I'm older than I thought. I met you when you were 15, and here we are 25 years later. So you're a sophomore in high school, and you had, what was it like going to school? We'll get into the actual story, but you're sophomore, you get shot, your friends die, and you've got to go to that school for the next 2 years. What was that like? It had to be surreal.
Yeah, I think the first day going back was kind of the hardest. But yeah, there were times where you'd be in class and you would be, the library where everything happened, or a lot of what happened where I was injured, was blocked off. And so my junior year, so it was just weird knowing that there was this empty void of a huge room where such a horrible event took place, but it was there. And it was kind of symbolic of what we were going through individually as, the survivors who survived that. We had this wound, this empty void that was always there. And then they remodeled it. I believe it was over the senior year, and they opened it up and made it a vaulted ceiling and painted murals on the ceiling, and it turned out really beautiful. But it was, and that's the way it is till this day. But it was different, definitely.
That library for you was, you were studying with a group of guys. Well, tell the story. You watched death happen there. You came to the edge of death's door with the guns to your head. Even when they open the space up and remodel, you walk in there, it has to be kind of surreal going, this is the spot that it happened. Yeah, it looks different, but you had to kind of still be able to put it together. What was that like?
There were times when I would go into the commons, our cafeteria area, and I would actually look up where I was in respect to where the library was above me. And that was something. And the other thing that was a kind of difficult was over the summer after the massacre, I actually went back to the crime scene with law enforcement to help piece together the investigation. And that was a difficult trip as well, because it was the crime scene. There were still bloody carpets, chairs turned over, little flags, so it was and then standing there and recounting my story, telling it of what I saw, what I heard, what happened when, and so that they could, like I said, piece together a timeline.
Wow. All right, this is a hopeful podcast, but we're going to start with the non-hopeful stuff. The two most important days of a man's life, the day he's born, the day he's figured out why. April the 20th, you 25 years ago was a day that I'm sure was a pivot in your life. You didn't know it was a pivot at 15, but everything afterwards kind of has that shadow on it. What happened? April the 20th. First of all, let's go back to little Evan. Little Evan, you're a sophomore in high school. You played sports. I know you're in scouts. Kind of talk about what life was like before that day that this massacre happened. What did you like? What did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, I was into scouts. I loved backpacking and hiking and fishing and, camping, getting out into the woods. I loved football. I had joined a football team. I had begged my parents for years to let me play football. And I think in sixth grade, I started playing football, and they just threw me on a random little league team. And for 3 years, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, I played with these guys and became friends with them. And the vast majority of them were going to Columbine High School. I actually lived in a different school district, well, not school district, but school zoning area. And so I was supposed to go to a different high school altogether. I actually transferred into Columbine my freshman year because I had built friendships with, all these guys on the football team. So my life was really about, camping and fishing and football. And
that's America right there.
Yeah, right. My brothers went there as well. So that was another reason I wanted to transfer. But it was the greatest, community that you could really ask for. Everyone was, got along really well. It was kind of laid back, our open campus policies. We could come and go as we wanted for lunches and breaks. And, everyone was really cool. It was the 90s, and I couldn't have asked for anything different. There's all kinds of activities and extracurricular parties and get-togethers, and yeah, life was good.
After, and we'll get into your story on that day, but they portrayed Columbine as a place where a bunch of bullies hung out and there's bullying. I mean, life in high school, we all probably felt a little bit of bullying or made fun of, but when you heard the story of how they painted the atmosphere at Columbine after the fact, did that match up with what you had experienced?
No, and I'm not going to say that Columbine was perfect in every realm. Like, I saw fistfights from different, aspects. That was still kind of a thing. I saw some bullying, and I saw kids are just mean. They'll say mean things, make jokes, and try and be funny when it's hurtful for other people. But I wouldn't say we were any different than any other school. It wasn't like, you didn't see people getting slammed in the lockers all the time, and there wasn't. There was some big, the big guys on campus, if you will, because they were, seniors, but that happened every year. Like, there was always the big man on campus type of thing. So yeah, I mean, the way that it was portrayed, and that actually opened my eyes, we can get into later, of how the world and how media pushes narratives and distorts facts for agendas.
Yeah. Evan, Todd, I'm thinking of the day that I heard about Columbine. I was working at a church down the street just as a volunteer, had some kids that I was mentoring there. One of the moms called me at the radio station I was working at and said, something's going on. Matt's stuck in the cafeteria. And that shocked me. And I immediately left the radio station in downtown Denver, drove over close to where I live. Closest I could get was Clement Park. And of course, the rest unfolded there at Clement Park. I was shocked and horrified, and driving as fast as I can from downtown Denver, just hearing that the neighborhood school where I lived nearby was under attack and some bad stuff was happening there. That was my reaction. You were in the school. Walk us through that day. You show up at school. It's in the morning. Somehow you end up in the library. What was going on? Why were you in the library? Why not in a classroom? I mean, so many questions. Paint the picture of what started to unfold.
Yeah, it was a normal spring day. I got to school early. The football players, we usually got to school before class started, and we'd lift weights for an hour or so. I went to my first couple classes that morning, and I was in the library I went there with a friend of mine who was on the football team. We actually, there was a couple of reasons we picked the library that day, which was kind of unusual. We didn't go to the library that often. But we had gotten in trouble at football practice. And as punishment, we were supposed to be running laps on the second half of our lunch hour. So we had been doing that all week, or I think the week before, and we had that week to do as well. But we didn't want to run that day. Ryan and I were both like exhausted. And we're just like, let's ditch it. Where should we go hide? And we're like, well, we're a couple of football players. Coach isn't going to look for us in the library. So, so we went to the library, and I was a procrastinator. So I was working on a last minute project for the next class period that was coming up on the English paper I was supposed to write. And so we went to the library, and I sat down and started, faking my way through a report, typing it into the computer. But I remember going into the library, and it was full, and the library was actually kind of a popular place. It was, almost all the tables were full with little groups of people, and it was quiet still, but they were studying, and you'd see people joking and pranking each other and throwing paper. It was just kind of the rambunctious kind of, free-spirited atmosphere in the library. And of course, the librarians, and doing all that. And, but it was, I remember seeing some of my other classmates and teammates when I walked in. But it was pretty normal up until we heard the first explosions and gunshots.
So you're sitting there working, and you tell us what you heard, and what did you think it was? What was the reaction?
Well, I first heard an explosion, and I looked out the windows that had panoramic windows. It's the green windows that Patrick Ireland had crawled out of, for those of you that have seen the news footage from that day. And I heard this explosion. I looked out the windows, and I saw a little bit of smoke. And my first thought was there was like a car accident came from the parking lot. And so I looked, and I didn't see anything. So I just kind of sat back down and started typing my paper, because I had, I figured it was just a little fender bender. And then I heard some pops, and I remember just kind of like looking around. I started looking at other people. There were people who were just still not, thinking anything of it. And then more gunshots kept coming. And I think before most others in the room, because I had, I'd been raised around guns. I'd heard guns fired, and I had shotguns. And so when I heard the noise, I could, my adrenaline started to pump, and I started to think like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And right as I'm looking out the door and looking out the windows, we start hearing the gunshots coming into the school, and you can hear them, reverberating off of the halls, and you could feel the percussion in your chest. You could feel the percussion, coming off the floors of the gunshots. And a teacher runs in, Patty Nielsen, and you could tell she was wounded in her shoulder. She had blood, and she was yelling, "Everyone get down, get down. There's kids with guns. Get down." And she goes to call 911, and that's the famous 911 tape that, you hear her screaming, "Get down, get under the desk." And everyone pretty much does, except for a couple people, a student who froze in his chair and sat there until he was murdered, execution style, and myself. And I was standing up behind a pillar, and I really had that fight or flight feeling at that time. There were two doors to the library, and I kept peeking around like, which way am I going to run? I got to get out of here. I didn't want to feel trapped. And as the gunshots got closer, and I could tell that they were right outside the hallway, I grabbed a big oak chair and I pulled it up close to me. And I was thinking, if they come around this corner, I'm just going to whack this guy, and then I keep peeking around the corner, and I look, and one of the murderers sees me move, and he turns to the doorway. And as I see him starting to lower his shotgun, I try to jump behind a copy machine, and he fires, and I'm hitting the lower left side of my back. And I kind of over jumped this copy machine where there was a little half wooden doorway that the librarians would walk through to get to their desk. And I kind of hit that, and I remember it like swinging. I remember that must have caught their eye, because he shot 2 or 3 more shots over my head, and it hit the desk and the computer desk in front of me and blew shrapnel back into my face and neck. And that's when the 2 murders came in. And that's when I realized there was 2 of them, because I heard them talking to each other. And they, they started to say things. They would shoot at random. They would throw pipe bombs. They would laugh and mock people. They would say some of the most disgusting things. And they walked around what seemed like methodically, and were just asking questions and shooting people execution style. And as they did that, I made my way around the desk, hiding from, what, as I could hear their voices getting closer, trying to just hide.
Wow. Did you know who they were? Had you seen these guys? Were you familiar with them?
No, I really didn't have a good look at them, because the one, I saw them walking in the hallway, so I just kind of saw silhouettes of them pass in front of the door. So I didn't have a good look at him before that moment. And when he came to the doorway, I really I didn't take a good look at him at that moment. But after they had moved through the library, they came back around to where I was hiding under the desk. And that's when I got a really good look at them, because I'd crawled into the foothole of what, the librarian's desk, and I'd pulled a chair up trying to hide myself. And I see boots come around from one side of the desk, and another set of boots come from the other side. And all of a sudden the chair gets yanked out, and it gets, it was on wheels, and he rolled it and hit the wall behind the desk. And one of the murderers kneels down, and he puts a gun to my face, and he starts talking and saying, why shouldn't we kill you? And I just remember, pleading for my life, saying, look, I've done nothing to you. I've been good to you and everyone in this school, and you know it. And something happened in that moment, and his facial expression changed. He stood up. He looked angry, but not, there was a demonic look in their face, the dead look in their eyes, that is unexplainable. But something happened. He got angry, grabbed the chair again, and slammed it on the desk because he was just angry. And he said, turned to the other murderer, and he said, you can kill him if you want. And he looked at me, holding the gun in his hand, stared at me for a few moments, and then they looked at each other, and they said, let's go to the commons. And they started to walk out of the library. So that interaction, I got a good look at their face, and I knew that they were students because I had seen them before, but I didn't know them. I'd never really interacted with them ever. I knew their face, and I knew that they were students at the school.
So you hear they're going to go to the commons. You're probably, obviously, to say the shock, you're under a desk. You just had 2 guns pointed at your head. How long did you stay there before you decided, or how did the evacuation, or you departing the library and crawling out from under the desk, happen?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what it was, or what I was even thinking, but as they were walking out of the library, I stood up and I turned towards them, and one of the murderers turned around and pointed the gun at me again. And I just kind of put my hands up and kind of backed away and started to almost sit down. And as I, put my hands up and just kind of backed away, they kept walking and left. I made my way back. There was a back office, and it connected to a classroom through a little back corridor. That was the Rebel News Network at the time. There's a big news network desk, wooden desk. And I climbed under there, and I'm I was like, I don't know where to go. I don't know if there's more outside. I don't know. So I just stood there for a moment, or I stayed there under the desk for a moment, and I heard a stampede in the adjacent hallway. And I could tell it was, a lot of students running. And so I get up and I look out this, little window, and peek through the door, and I see there's a bunch of students running out the library. And so I looked to see if anyone was chasing them, and I didn't see anyone coming back. And so I go to the door, the exit door to the outside of the building, and I kind of peek out, and I see, there's patrol car, a Jefferson County Sheriff's patrol car, and I could see an officer's head and gun pointed at the school. And so, I'm nervous, no matter which way I'm going. And so I finally just look around and I'm like, I'm making a run for it. So I ran, and that's when I made it out of the school. And I remember there was a couple things, like as I caught up kind of to the group, and there were people stumbling around the car, and there was a couple people I helped kind of, I think it was another student who had been wounded, but I helped them behind the car. And the thing that surprised me was when I got around the trunk of the patrol car, there was like 20 or 30 students just parallel to the school hiding behind this car, which I couldn't see from, the view I just ran from. But when I got back there, I ran into my friend that I had come to the library with, my teammate. And I hadn't seen him since, the shooting had started, probably 10, 15, 20 minutes before. And once I got back there, he said, we got to get out of here. Let's go. So there was a football equipment shed that was, about another 20 yards away or so. So we're like, let's make a run for that, and we can kind of head out the back way of the school. And so we head up there, and we get behind. As we come behind the shed, there's another student who had been shot several times, and a police officer. And that was kind of aggravating, because I saw this student just like bleeding out, and this officer doing nothing except for pointing his gun at the school. And I interacted with him, and then because of the skills that I learned in Boy Scouts, I started trying to do the few things of medical care that I knew. So I drug the student out from the shade into the warm sun, because I always, was taught in Scouts, like keep them warm, keep them conscious, elevate their feet. So we put our hands over some of the bullet holes. And we were just trying to basically just keep them alive long enough to get them somewhere.
Wow. Now you had been shot as well. That you had shrapnel in you. You got shot in your lower left back, and you're caring for someone else who's bleeding out in the parking lot or behind the equipment shed. What did you know you had been injured at that point, or was the adrenaline too much?
No, I knew I had been injured because I felt it. My back, I knew in that moment. But I also, my adrenaline was so high. It's not that I forgot. The pain didn't matter. It was, and I also, the shrapnel, part of the shrapnel that was blown back into my face was a chunk of wood that actually lodged into my eye, just barely missing my eyeball. It went into my eye socket. But I remember the second it hit, it was just reaction. When it hit, I just pulled it out immediately. And I remember just feeling blood kind of start to gush down. And the adrenaline, I was sweating so bad that the sweat was actually just clearing the blood off my face. And then, I was definitely one of the fortunate ones who wasn't shot at, a lot of the students were shot at point blank range. Luckily, I was shot with bird shot from a good distance. And yeah, I only had just a handful of small pellets, I think, because of the fact that they sawed off the shotgun. The cone spread was wider. So there were a lot of factors that played into me being able to survive. But it really didn't matter. And then, it was the other thing that there were just so many people, like when we were up there, once we made it up there, people saw what we did and they ran up there too. So more injured students just kept coming, and, people were just dazed and, confused. And so we were just telling them, like, hey, put a hand on that and let's go. And then right as we're, trying to help other students, I think it was a Lakewood PD patrol car started driving up the back sidewalk. He had made his way through. I think they were trying to get ambulances up that way, but they couldn't because there was a chain link fence and post. And So he had driven up there to see if he could transport injured people. And the second he got up there, the student that I was caring for was definitely the worst off. He was going in and out of consciousness. He had lost a lot of blood. And so I yelled over to the officer, said, "Hey, we got to get him out of here." And he comes over, running over, and we run him to the patrol car. We jump in, my buddy and I from the library, and our other friend, and Mike, who had been shot. We got him in the front seat, and we're talking to him, trying to keep him conscious. And we get him down to a nearby cul-de-sac where there was an ambulance waiting, and put him in right away. And they rushed off. And my friend that I was in the library with actually lived just down the street. So we ran to his house, and I called my brother, who was homesick that day from school, and he picked me up, and I made my way from there to a local ER, where I spent, several hours of them cleaning out my wounds and caring for my eye and, patching me up.
Did you, at that point, you saw the carnage in the parking lot. When you left the library, did you know all that had occurred? Did you see the carnage? Did you know who had been shot there? Or did you just hide under that desk and able to just get out of there without having the full visual of it?
So the library, there was a moment before I left, before I put my hands up, they walked out of the library, and there was a moment that I turned and I looked, and I saw just still, no one moving, just bodies laying on the floor. And I whispered, and I said, is anyone alive? And one thing that I had learned in the aftermath is the investigator said, what did you hear at this time, and why did you whisper? And I just heard silence. So something, I found a natural, physiological thing that happens to people and traumatic, that is something just shuts off. Like the fire alarm was going, people were crying. It was loud, but after my interaction with them, my body just turned off my hearing temporarily. And I whispered, and I didn't see anyone moving. And so I thought everyone was dead. I honestly thought I was the only survivor. And I had thought that too. I thought I was a dead man even when I had my interaction with them, because I had heard them several times go up to someone, talk to them or mock them or laugh at them, ask them questions. And then I heard gunshots. So they would talk, gunshot. And I was like, oh my, like, this is like, if they see me again and talk to me, they're just going to murder me. And so I really thought that, I was the only survivor at that point, until I heard that stampede of people running out, that I realized that some of them were just playing dead. And so
that's, I am sitting here just thinking of that whole moment. And you said you heard these killers talking to people. The stories, obviously the most legendary stories, are asking people about their faith and do you believe in God? Was there a specific line of questioning the killers were pursuing? Were they hunting? What were they doing?
Yeah, I mean, they were just, there were times that they were hooping and hollering like someone would do at a sports event, that they were going to. They would talk about how awesome this was to each other. This is effing awesome. There was, Val Schnur, who had been shot, and she was basically, she'd been shot several times, and just from the random shooting, and she was going, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." And that's when they mocked God. They said, "Why do you people believe in God?" And I think one of them yelled up at that point, "I am God." And they laughed, and then they kept shooting her, shot her several more times. There was a moment when they had shot Isaiah, and one of them said to the other, "Come over here and look at this inwards brains."
Wow.
There was a moment when they were like, "Hey, we should just start knifing people." They were just so comfortable with zero fear of being, stopped at that moment, that they even consider just starting to knife people. And then they would laugh and, at people who, if someone said they wanted their mom, they would laugh. Or someone, just the most disgusting things.
Yeah. Wow. When you talk about the devaluing of life and what's being taught or not taught, what do you think that is? How do we get to that? What are we doing or not doing that is devaluing life in our culture? Because obviously we've got young men that show up, predominantly young men. Tennessee's an exception, but predominantly young men that are hell-bent on killing people at times.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you start looking at the history of America, that, the Bible was the number one textbook in American schools for generations. And then slowly, I think, probably in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, God was removed from school. So there was a moral vacuum where everything was just kind of like, and I think it slowly devolved. I think the longer we have no moral code in our schools, you can see, I mean, now they're dressing like animals and they can't decide, if they're a boy or a girl. And so the decay just keeps happening and keeps going. So yeah, it's definitely removing God from schools. You have, no value of life. And this is something that one of the things was when I was looking at the murderers who were about to kill me, one of them was wearing a shirt that said natural selection. And they had tapes that they had done and blog posts, if you will, that talked about how they thought they were the next evolution of human. They thought they were above everyone else. They truly believed that they were the next greatest, smartest, coolest, whatever thing that came from humans. So, they think that they came from ooh and goo, and that they had the right to take someone else's life. And so again, all that culminating into one spot, and you get the ultimate result of what happens at Columbine. And to point to the young men, young men have been under attack for a few generations now, saying that they shouldn't be men and that they shouldn't, that they're not valued, and it's the whole thing with the attack on family, the attack on all these things, I think is really leading to what we see. And that's why I said from the beginning, the more I see us going down the same path, the more we'll see of these horrible incidents, because the more of these monsters are being created.
You probably, we've talked about, you had to go back into school for the next 2 years after your junior and senior year. We've kind of talked about that day. And we talked a little bit about what life was like, but what did you want to be when you grew up? I mean, what were you hoping to, did you have aspirations? Were you planning to go to college? Were you going to be the next football stud? What were your big dreams in?
Yeah. I think when I was younger, I wanted to possibly go down the military route. As I played football, I wanted to play football possibly in college.
Yeah.
I really didn't have, I was living a lot really in the moment. I just, day by day, I wasn't really, I wasn't one of those people that was like, oh, I'm going to go be a doctor when and like focus everything. And maybe I should have been, but yeah, Columbine actually forced me to look at life, and in a way, life kind of chose my direction from that point too. And so that's something that I think my, even beforehand and after the event, is unusual from probably a lot of people.
Yeah. Do you, the Bible says the steps of the righteous are ordered of God. All things work together for good. And anybody who's ever been to church has heard all those things. Obviously, God had a plan for you. He wasn't surprised that April 20th happened for you. And I don't want to say, are you happy that your life took this trajectory? Do you have an understanding of why maybe that your life took, do you find joy in the fact that you had to go through this horrible awful experience, have you found the redemptive value of it at all?
Yeah, and that's something that it is. It's hard to explain, but yeah, think that I think all of us, every single person on this planet, is put in the place that they are for a reason, and every single one of us has a purpose and a plan, um, and mine happened to be to go through this event. And to be honest, I don't know if I could even fully grasp the reason. Um, I know, I don't know if it is even one singular reason. Even when I look at the Bible, it's one of the funny things that's kind of occurred to me, and I turned to the Bible a lot after Columbine. But you start reading in the Old Testament, and you hear like the names of the fathers, and this, how about I begat so and so, and this one, how about it begat this and this and this, and you have all these generations that most people skip over. And I thought for a minute, well, without all of those generations, you wouldn't have that lineage all the way to our Savior and Messiah. And so I'm thinking like all of those fathers were important just for that reason, to keep passing the torch down. And so like sometimes I think like is that the that could have been the purpose in my life, or my father's life, my son's life, is just to keep passing, not that we're going to have the next Savior, but we're passing the same knowledge of our Creator, and our morals, and our, and I don't know, maybe 7 generations from now, something great's going to come. And that was my purpose in life.
Yeah.
But I just know that if in the moment, I do what I believe is the path that God has put me on, I think that path will accomplish many things, whether that's helping other people, or defending other people.
You've traveled since Columbine, especially several years after. You were a traveling speaker. I know there's been other school shootings that have happened, and you've kind of gone in, and God was able to use you through your horrible experience, to speak to maybe from a platform and a paradigm that other people couldn't speak to. Talk about some of those interactions when a school shooting has occurred, or you get asked to come in and speak at a conference. That's been a part of your life.
Yeah. And it's actually one of the biggest blessings, and I'm humbled that I have had these opportunities to do these things, because like you said, I've responded to other horrific events, like even 9/11. I remember going up and shortly after 9/11 happened, and sitting down with the firefighters who had just gone through the worst thing that they had ever imagined in their life, who had lost, multiple coworkers and buddies. And I remember sitting with them, and it was part of a ministry. And the thing was, they were just so, it just speaks to their character, but they were so concerned with what I had been through. But, I was able to go there and talk with them and kind of help, just be someone to talk to who'd gone through trauma too. And then responding, I went to Erfurt, Germany, when 17 students were murdered in a high school over there, and speaking with the students and really telling them, like, the thing that I had been through, there is a tunnel, like any storm that comes into your life, it doesn't rain forever. It doesn't, the suck doesn't always last forever. There is sunshine, and there is life and hope, and there are great things that come after that. And so I think, and I see that in my own life too, like having a family and kids, and, just all the great things that I'm blessed with has really given me perspective on, going through trauma, and really, maybe that was a part of my purpose too, is to just help other people who go through their own trauma, and help them, show them the way if I can.
What helped you, I guess, come to grips with that, I was going to go to the military, maybe I was going to do this, but this is the life that this happened. And now I'm in this moment able to help the guys, after the firefighters after 9/11, go to Germany after a school shooting. Where did you get that strength? You've talked about your faith. You've talked about your Savior, Messiah. When did that really just become a reality? Did Columbine spark that in you, that search?
Yeah, and I think it's growing even to this day, because I turned to Scripture because I had chosen that Christ was my Lord and Savior before Columbine. But I was a pretty typical, young Christian. I think I never opened my Bible, but I heard how much wisdom and uh, and and help it could be. And I remember jumping around for many years. I basically just cherry picked, some of the verses that spoke to me and helped me, and would give me wisdom. But then over the years, and especially even the last few years, the more I dive into the Bible and see the stories of perseverance and redemption through all kinds of adversity and how God works in people's lives, and I see miracles in my own life. Um, it's amazing how much God, if you really turn towards God, and how much He can work in your life, and it's mind blowing. Some of the stories. I was actually with some friends last night. We had a barbecue, some Columbine survivors. We were sitting around a campfire, and this is it's something that's kind of odd, but a lot of the Columbine survivors never really sat down and talked about what they went through. We would sit down and talk about life and each things, but we never really shared our experiences. And so we were doing that, and one of the things that came up was Dave Sanders. He had saved so many people's lives by running around and ushering people to safety. And there's a point where Dave was running up the stairs, and he started turning towards the library to run in there to tell us to get out there, the run down the hallway the other way. But as he made that corner, he got shot by one of the murderers in the chest. And so he turned and started to run away. And that's when he was shot in the back from the murderers. Well, as this is happening and he's coming back around the corner, there's two girls running up the stairs, and they start turning towards the library, and he directs them, no, go the other way. The murderers are right here, basically. So these two girls start running off and make it out of the building safely because of him. And one of those two girls is actually my wife.
Oh, wow.
And yeah.
Wow. That's just because there was a person there in that moment.
And yeah, and I didn't even know that till after we were married, because we obviously knew, both of us went to Columbine, but we didn't even really know each other's stories fully. She obviously knew mine more than because I've been outspoken about it, but a lot of people haven't shared their stories, and she told me that, and so just the fact that the way God worked, through Dave Sanders and how he was such a hero, and my kids are here today because of that. And so, just little things like just blow my mind, and on how life works out.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you don't know how the begats in the Bible, the begat, he begat. We don't know what happened 7 generations down, but we do know in Evan Todd's life, my life, whatever, that in the moment that we're at, you use that situation, you do the best you can. You've stood up and you've done trauma counseling, you've traveled, you use your platform to stand up for the Second Amendment, the Constitution. I mean, that's a pretty big, the day you were born, the day you figured out why. You may not exactly know why exactly certain things happen, but you make the best of those opportunities, and you do, God, you kept me on the planet for a reason. Let me do everything I can.
Yeah. And, and honestly, I think if I were to sum it up, the reason I was born was to serve God, and He continues to bless me and point me into the places where I can serve Him and serve other people, whether that's, even in politics, helping people protect their families and their lives by protecting the Second Amendment, or helping people through trauma, or, whichever way he leads me to go, which doors open is, I say, yes, sir, let's go.
Yeah.
And do what I can.
Anybody out there that's, I've talked to a guy, I want to get on the podcast. He's quite successful businessman. He goes, I don't know my why. I said, but we all do, because what you just said, whatever your hand finds to do it all to God's glory, serve God. And you're here for a reason. And you ended up with a platform and a stage and a paradigm that you went through hell to get to, but that's what you were trusted with. And I do stuff in Africa, but everybody's got the same purpose can follow for all of us, that even if you're not doing something epic, starting orphanages or building hospitals or speaking to 9/11 survivors and firefighters, you still got an opportunity today to fulfill the why for today. Evan, Todd, it has been a pleasure. I know it's kind of a little heavy topic. Let me ask you one more quick question. When you have to go through this, and I know probably you don't talk about it as much, is it a joy to talk about and recount and keep the memory alive of what happened at Columbine, or does it get old?
There's definitely been times when it's gotten old, and I think with my children being born, my son's 6, my perspective on life changed again, and I had a new meaning and a new purpose, I think, and not only that, but just a whole new gratitude towards life and how precious it is seeing a child be born and slowly grow and learn. And so yeah, I mean, and now I'm just blown away with gratitude of what my life has become. And so it's hard sometimes to talk about. And there are times that I get choked up, and it's really a happiness. Like, it's so overwhelming of like how much has been done in my life, and the way it's, it turns out.
Evan, Todd, thanks for being on the podcast. It was when you said yes, I was like, yes. I told producer Chad, Evan's going to be on the program, because I just knew it was a crazy story of how a 15-year-old kid, life trajectory changes. I'm guessing at 15, you never guessed you'd be speaking to guys that survived a terrorist attack or rescue. You never guessed you'd be traveling to Germany. You never even dreamt of what your family would look like. But the way you're a father is different because of what happened at 15. And you made the best of it, and God's taking care of you. So thanks for being on the podcast, sir.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the Critical Mission podcast. That was Evan Todd. Fantastic interview. Remember, your mission is critical. His mission is critical. Go to our website, mymissioniscritical.com. You can learn more about some of the other guests that we've had on the program. But thanks for listening to this episode of the Critical Mission Podcast.